Last week, I gave a talk in Tokyo about developer experience, or DX, as well as DevRel, and some of the things that have worked for me in the past 4.5 years at Vercel. And I realized I've never really done a talk about this, so this is probably only for those of you who are working in DX, DevRel, education, documentation, technical writing type roles. But it could be interesting for others. So I figured I would do the talk again. It wasn't recorded, and walk through the slides and just, we'll see how it goes. In case you haven't heard of Vercel, we are the creators and maintainers of many different frameworks and libraries like Next.js, V0, which is our AI product for building UIs, Turbo Repo, AI SDK, which kind of helps you build your own ChatGPT-like applications, and more. And I have the privilege of working on developer experience and helping teach our community, grow our community for all of these tools and products. And product is the most important thing. If you take nothing else away from this talk, it's product, 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 product. No marketing can fix a broken product. No amount of sales can fix broken marketing. And if your DX team is not focused on actually building a great product, well, it's going to be pretty tough here. Now, when I'm talking about product, I'm talking about engineering and design, as well as the art of product. So building something that developers want to actually use. This should be where you're spending the majority of your time as a person in DX, whether that's a leader or people on the team, is taking community feedback, taking what you feel like is not great with the product, and funneling that back in to make changes, either contributions from yourself or helping work with the product and engineering teams along the way. Because marketing can't fix a broken product. Everything is downstream from that product experience. And the only way to get to ground truth is to spend a lot of time talking to developers, talking to people in your community, and figuring out what's wrong. I call this just gathering feedback or being truth seeking, but it's generally a very painful process to have people tell you this thing is not good or this thing is pretty bad. But you learn over time that it's much better to have the feedback earlier and to build a culture of a product and a community that is willing to accept feedback, because it helps you iterate to build a great product. If you don't get any feedback, you're not going to know what you need to fix. So over time, it actually turns into a great strength and advantage to be willing to accept feedback that maybe sometimes is a little hard to hear. Now, the most common question I get from a lot of people looking to build out their DX orgs or their first DevRel hire is, where do I actually need to hire, and like, where does this person report to? Honestly, I've talked to enough people over the years that the reporting line doesn't matter. Report wherever you want. But generally, the way I think about this is that DX is kind of a cross section of marketing, product, and sales. And the people that you hire into this role, especially the first person, needs to be a generalist. At least for me, the type of skills that I had, I would say I spiked more in product and actually building things in the engineering side. I was not very good at sales. And I understood a little bit of marketing. Like, I knew what developers liked, and I had a sense of the taste of what I thought great developer marketing looked like. But I definitely was not an expert in either of the latter two categories here. Was definitely more of the builder type. And over time, through having a great team around me in sales and in marketing and in engineering and in other places, helped kind of round out a lot of the skills that I needed to be a great DX leader. And it's not that obviously I'm not doing all the sales. Obviously, I'm not doing all the marketing. More so that I'm learning what good looks like from people in these roles. And I think ideally, the first person that you hire here can kind of clone themselves and replicate this same process for everyone else that you bring onto the team. And in building out your community or being a part of a larger community, the first hire is going to set the foundation for the rest of the hires to come. And the best hires will come from the community. I've seen this time and time again. It's the people who are building and sharing interesting things with your technology, your framework, your tools, your product. You can learn from them. You want to work with them. Maybe you even want to report to them. They're so good. Those are the people that you absolutely want to work with. And you'll find them because they're active and they're sharing things in your community. They have a passion and an excitement for the product or the community or the developers that you're working with. And generally, that's where I've seen the best success for companies kind of getting started once they're kind of building out that moat of people who love their product. So I think about DX in three categories: documentation, community, and education. Now, I kind of feel like I still reference DevRel every now and then because I think it's a helpful word sometimes, but also it becomes a very generalist term that I think loses a lot of meaning as a company grows. So that's why I say, like, your first DevRel hire, I think it can sometimes help you find the right category of person. But over time, your team gets to a point where you have to more specialize. So, for example, in the beginning, a DevRel person could do all of Doc's community and education. But over time, in building more of a developer experience function, you definitely want to have people for each one of these roles. So let's talk about documentation first. The hardest first, right? Documentation is a core part of the product experience. It can't be an afterthought. You have to consider it as you're building the process and as you're building the product and the process for actually making updates to the product. Not only that, docs have to be treated like a product. They have to be constantly updated and grown, and you pay down the docs tech debt and you invest in upgrading the dependencies and the foundations of the actual platform that you're building with. It's really critical to do that. Otherwise, you can get into a situation where the docs platform itself is pretty stale and you can't innovate and try out new ideas. The content itself is stale and it's hard to make changes. And if you have a functioning product org, every release should come with up-to-date documentation. So if the docs part is the bottleneck, well, you've actually just bottlenecked your entire product development process, which obviously is not good. On AI models and making your docs relevant to AIs is more important than ever before. And ironically, this makes the docs content that you're writing more important than ever before. You want your community, your developers to get access to your docs wherever that they're living. It's not that you expect them that they have to go out to vercel.com/docs. You want to meet them where they're at, in their editor or increasingly in all these new AI tools. And to do that, you need to start thinking about ways to get your docs into those places. So obviously part of that is getting it on the web with good SEO and good performance so it can be picked up by crawlers, and making sure you're not inadvertently blocking crawlers on your docs pages, but also trying out some of the new things like LLMs.txt or maybe the model context protocol, which is kind of like a tool call that you can do to remotely run code from your product and referencing your documentation. You can also build your own kind of search or RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which is just a fancy way of saying looking up, making an AI call that has the context of your docs. You might want to build out your own experience that has that. So you can always be synced and up to date with the latest docs changes, because generally most AI models are not up to date with the latest. They're usually behind on some training period. So the big takeaway is you want to make sure not only do your docs work well standalone, but increasingly when they come from AI tools. And also you want to make sure your documentation is indexed and accessible in IDEs. So the most common place for this is JSDoc if you're working in the TypeScript ecosystem. So for example, in this image, we've made sure that when you hover over learning about cache life, that there's helpful documentation in the context of your editor. I think Next.js still has a lot more work to do here, and we've been investing in this further, but would recommend this to folks in general for how they're getting started. And you can take this to its logical extreme as well and actually generate your documentation from source code. That is more of a function of how your team works. For example, I think the React Router team is exploring auto-genning doc from their JS docs, so shout out to Ryan on that one. But it's something to consider, because I know myself personally, it's nice to have those really helpful JS docs when you're in the context of your editor. And with AI editors, you're spending a lot more time in the editors. And also, the AIs can reference the source files and the JS docs in those source files. Docs is a grind, if I'm going to be honest. It is an infinite grind on improving quality. It's 1% iterations every single day, sometimes it's hard to kind of see through the forest, see the trees through the forest, see the forest through the trees. But it's worth it. It's worth investing in your documentation. It's worth investing in having a great and easy to use platform to read your documentation, building the systems and tools to keep the content fresh and up to date and prevent broken links and make the contribution internally for how you ship docs really high quality. All of those things are incredibly, incredibly important. As your company grows, you're going to want to find ways to scale yourself even better. And AI can help a lot here. So for those of you who have worked in docs for some time, you might have seen kind of static docs linters. One that's very popular is called Vercel. And these are helpful in some regard because they can allow you to prevent issues when you have maybe 10, 50, 100 engineers who are trying to contribute documentation, making sure they align to the style guide that you want. But they usually involve inflexible allow lists of words, especially product names. They don't have this broad world knowledge, and sometimes they run in pre-commit hooks, which is just increasingly annoying. We actually ended up removing Vercel as a pre-commit hook, which is why I said that, and moving to an AI bot on our PRs. And honestly, I think the total file is like 150 lines of code, 200 lines of code. It's really not that long. It's just a GitHub action that calls the AI SDK, which calls, I think we do 2 calls, one to Gemini to classify it, and I think we do another one to OpenAI to do the rest of the suggestions. But with GitHub's suggestions workflow here, where you can actually put suggestions on the review, and this UX to me is so much better than what's existed before because you can just ignore it if it's not a good suggestion. And AI is not going to be perfect. It's going to get it wrong sometimes. So you go through and it's like you had this extra AI review basically. If it's bad, ignore it. If it's great, you can just click, add to the batch basically, and then commit that suggestion. This has already been so helpful for our team, specifically for people, engineers at Vercel, not on the documentation team, who are trying to write great docs, have it match our style guide, have it write in kind of clear, concise grammar, clear, concise sentence structure that matches the format that we like for our documentation, getting using sentence casing, like little things that you try to do to make consistent docs that feel like they're written by one person. AI is pretty good at that. And it's got this broad world knowledge and this broad understanding of what makes great writing way better than a static tool can define. So embrace AI tools that can help make your job easier. This does not replace but augments the existing workflows and hopefully allows you to scale your team a little bit better here. I think pretty soon we will have AI agents that can kind of run 24/7 in the background and improve your docs for you. I think there are some companies who are starting to explore this, but I haven't seen a good example of it yet. I'm sure it's not too far out though. You can imagine it like this. For those of you who work on larger teams, on the largest end, you have thousands of docs pages, and there's always docs debt. There's always things that you'd love to update it if you had all the time in the world, but you don't. So some docs pages just kind of rot, and you maybe haven't updated them in like 3 years. And maybe somebody made the contribution before you fixed something in your style guide, and you don't have enough time in the day to go through and edit all of those things. Wouldn't it be great if you could take that rule set that you've defined and curated and iterated on, and then just have AIs crawl your docs and try to figure out how to make things better? I think this could be really promising, but still pretty early here. Okay, second, community. And especially if you're trying to build something in open source, this is a very important part of developer experience. Of course, you'll still work with the teams who are actually building the product, but I think developer experience can play a very strong hand in shaping and growing and fostering a vibrant community. To me, one of the biggest things is just as a DX leader, as a DX team, you really want to have a pulse on the community sentiment. One of the things I've said in the past is what makes a great DevRel is that they can give a 5-minute demo of the product unscripted, just off the cuff. They just know their product that well. They can list out the most popular or the best features of the product based on the community's perception, And they can do the opposite. So they know the top 3 or 4 pain points in the community, what sucks with the product, off of the top of their head. Like, they've seen every post. They know what's good. They know what's bad. And I think having that pulse just requires ingesting a lot of content on what the community is feeling. And I'll talk about this a little bit more as we go on here. But one thing I like to do just to keep a pulse is just to do AMAs. Ask me anything. Ask people in the community to talk more about how they're feeling about Next.js or Vercel, things they would like to see us change, things they would like to see us improve. And I'm always impressed by the quality of the responses I get from the community, the quality of the content and what I learn, and how it helps me refine my model for what we need to work on, what's kind of problematic, and what we can make better. So would highly recommend doing this. Over time, we've kind of built this culture of asking for feedback and getting feedback, and that's helped make these AMAs pretty productive. I've been doing them for the last 4 years. So ultimately, it builds this funnel of how you as a person in DX can help make your product great. And like I said at the start, it all comes back to having a great product. Your products teams ship something, you make it really easy for your customers, your developers to actually give feedback on if it was good, if it sucked. As your team scales, you want to figure out how to route that feedback back to the right team. When it's a small team, it's like, just the 2 engineers who are working on it, so it's not really a big issue. For us, we have many different product areas, and for each of those different product areas or parts of our product, we want to send feedback directly to the engineers and designers and product folks working on that part of the product. So we've kind of built that system. Then critically, you fix the problem and you have this 2-way link between the feedback and the problem. And then you follow up with the customer. You let them know, hey, thank you for this feedback. This was, not the greatest experience. We had a bug here and we fixed it. And we've made changes based on your thoughts. Here's kind of what our internal tool looks like. Again, this was not a ton of code. It's just a, Slack webhook, Slack bots, where we are using our own tools. We're using Vercel for the functions and the AI SDK. What we do is we're logging all the feedback. Customers can do a thumbs up, thumbs down, leave emojis, leave additional comments on all of our sites, and then we route it to the right channels. We throw on some AI spam filtering, we throw on some AI translations, all these things that allow us to get this feedback routed to the right places. Another thing that we do that I've found extremely helpful is understand the sentiment on social media. So in the past, we had built a lot of this tooling ourselves. We built a Hacker News bot. We built, Reddit webhooks and Zapier workflows. And back in the day when the Twitter API was still open, we had a thing for that too. I always like this anecdote of back in the day when I joined Vercel. I would wake up every morning and just read all the posts, like read every tweet. And 4.5 years ago, I would go through and there was enough Next.js tweets that it was actually consumable for me to do in a day and kind of understand what was going on. As things have grown, that's not feasible to do. And AI tools help me still get a pulse on the community by filtering out the spam, filtering out the things that are kind of lower signal, and especially the things where people are not having a good time. I want to follow up with them. I want somebody on our team to take a look and make sure that we're addressing their issues. Now, critically, this is using AI to help us find things. It is not using AI to help us respond to things. Developers don't want to hear from AI bots in your responses. I'm sure you've all got X bots or other bots who are replying to posts. It's super annoying. Nobody wants that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So they want to talk to humans. So even if you identify this, you still want to respond as a human, triage it, be empathetic, try to be helpful. It's not a sales pitch for your product. You're just trying to help them get over their issue, even if it means nothing for you in return. This is a long game in community building, and it's not always about just pitching them the latest improvement to your product. This photo, which was captured by an amazing community member at the Tokyo Meetup, was taken of me giving this talk. So it kind of inception here. But the reason why I wanted to include it, and I didn't really spend that much time talking about this at the talk, is DevRel is kind of shifting back to be more meetup focused than conference focused, in my humble opinion, because I think honestly coming out of post-COVID, everybody was burnt out on online events. The quality kind of went down quite a bit, and people were longing for that in-person connection. And at the same time, I think the conference infrastructure just isn't the same as what it used to be. I think the quality of the talks maybe hasn't been as good as it was in the past. And people want to spend more quality one-on-one time in smaller groups with people. So I would recommend investing in more meetups. We certainly want to do more Vercel meetups this year, just to spend time in local communities with people who are using our tools. And this goes for almost every conference talk, but I'll reiterate it now. The goal is not to sell your product. I still see too many DevRels who are trying to sell their product in talks. That's not what it's about. You're about teaching developers something. If they end up using your product, that's great. If not, that's fine. The goal is to educate. The other stuff will come later. Just something to remember. So local meetups, definitely worth investing in, maybe over the larger conferences. The last bit I want to talk about here is just generally education. There's a lot I could talk about here, and I could go on for days, so I'll kind of keep it short. But after you put product out in the world, you hear feedback about what's working well, you hear feedback about what's maybe not working so well, and you're shipping improvements. You're also building up this world view of how customers understand your product, and you know the places where they're confused. If you answer the same questions 3 or 4 times, you should probably write up a little guide or tweak your docs on that. But if it's 10 times or 50 times, maybe the marketing is wrong. Like maybe your whole pitch for the product isn't resonating. Maybe you need to really rethink how you're educating customers entirely on this. And I have found this time and time again to be one of the most challenging things, because it requires a lot of exposure to the community feedback, a broad understanding of how the product works, and also a skill that can be cultivated, but a skill of explaining complex topics in a way that feels easy to understand and is approachable. I'll give you a couple examples that have worked for me. I like just building interesting demos and sharing what I've built with the community, and it's using the framework that I work on, Next.js, and you can deploy it wherever. But I make the demo on Vercel. I make it really easy to deploy to Vercel. I think that'll be a great fit for a lot of people. But the code's open source. You can go check it out. Hopefully it shows you good patterns for how to build with the framework, kind of endorsed by people who work on it, or hopefully have a good understanding of how it works. And you just put that out into the public, and you let people work with it and hack it and fork it and make contributions. That model has worked pretty well for me. Another example is that, we've had documentation on self-hosting for many years. I made a video about Docker in like 2022, but I was still getting all of this feedback. Self-hosting is hard. Self-hosting is confusing. How do I deploy to a VPS? And you would kind of think, isn't that in conflict with the goal of Vercel? Isn't the goal of Vercel to get you to deploy to their platform? Why would Lee teach people how to deploy Next.js anywhere? It kind of goes back to the DevRel. It's not really about selling on your platform. Yes, I would love if people use Vercel. The reality is not everyone's going to use Vercel, and that's totally fine. There's a lot of people who want to deploy to their own infrastructure because they enjoy it or because their company demands it. And I want Next.js to be a great experience for those people too. So I've been mulling on this for a while, trying to figure out the right way to kind of get the narrative right, and at the same time helping funnel a lot of product feedback back to the Next.js team so we could make the actual process of self-hosting easier. No amount of marketing here. I can't just make a video if actually self-hosting sucks. Like if the experience of doing it is bad, the video isn't going to help that much. So the timing for the video I think worked out well, because I'm pretty happy with our self-hosting support now. We still have a couple things coming that I think will be even better, but we've really invested here heavily over the last year, and I kind of was able to take all of that and put it into this one video. Now, it's not shown in the screenshot, but another thing I did here that I think is very helpful is brought the community along the way as I was building things. So there was probably like 10 different tweets where I was walking through the process of, hey, I'm going to build this thing. Here's what I'm working on. I just made this diagram. Do you think it's helpful? And along the way, I got feedback. Yes, that's helpful. No, that's not helpful. That helped me refine once I got to the video, which is kind of the final artifact. You can't edit the video. Once the video's out, it's kind of done. So you want to try to maximize the half-life of the video such that it's not extinct in 4 months. Realistically, like most videos, unless you're doing truly evergreen content, probably have a half-life of like a year, especially if you have product UI, because the product UI changes. So it's more of a point-in-time reference and educational piece, and then it's bonus points, kudos, the longer you can extend the runway for that piece of material. But there's a lot you can do in education. I could talk about this one for days. I've already talked quite a bit, but this was pretty much the whole talk that I had. Again, I've never really given a talk, more of the behind the scenes of how we cook, or some things that I think make a well-structured DX team. But maybe this was helpful. Let me know if it was. Let me know what questions you'd like to see, and I'll see you in the next one, which is probably a normal video. Peace.